What I wanted to do is just tell you a little bit about who Bill is and what Bill's about. Sometimes you meet people in life where you have a phone call, a conversation with them, and you realize I need a piece of paper in front of me every time I talk to them. He's one of those guys. Bill's been on the board of trustees of the Deming Institute for 12 years. And when I first started having conversations with Bill, I remember saying, Bill, I can't talk now. And he probably couldn't figure out why I didn't say, I didn't want to admit that I had to go get a piece of paper, because there was always something that he said that I'd write down and say, man, this was really a good pearl. I'd drive my wife nuts about it. Okay, now we got to talk about this. And all right. But so anyway, Bill was with the Institute for a long time on the board of directors, and was at Rocketdyne, which for many of you probably already know Bill. They build the space shuttle engines and many other missile engines, and put man into space through the Apollo program with the engines. And so Bill was there working on a lot of different things over the years, and it was fascinating to go and participate in his sessions at Rocketdyne, and occasionally have the opportunity to share some memories about my grandfather with Bill and with his group. And so when Bill told me that Rocketdyne was being bought for probably 5th or 6th times, at least whatever number of times since I've known Bill, and he was thinking about retiring or doing something else, I thought, this is our opportunity, because nothing could be better than, rather than having just phone calls every once in a while with Bill, once a month, once every couple of weeks, to be able to talk with him every single day. And would he be interested in coming on the staff of the Deming Institute? And eventually, fairly soon, taking over my position as executive director of the Institute, which enables us, we'd still work together full time, but put him in the position of that full-time leadership of the organization. And so it was really exciting when Bill said yes. I was like, how soon, kids? He's going to take, Monica's going to finally get him and say, we're going to go on a vacation for a long time. Bill, I think, worked till 2 a.m. that night and started at about 8 a.m. the next morning before I was up. And so he's been doing that since, I think, October 14th was your first day. And it's been an absolute thrill. And as you go along over the next few years, you'll see what the Institute is doing and how Bill's been able to take us to a different level in terms of bringing this message and opening it up to a wider audience. So with that, I'll let Bill take over.
Yeah, Kevin and I spoke on August 4th for a couple hours about a long number of things. And then the following Monday, called me, sent me, I think, an email, said, got some more things to talk about. Can we talk on Friday? I said, sure. And we started with what I thought we were going to talk about. Then he said, well, let me change the subject. And he said, how'd you like to come work for the Institute full time? And my head is just beginning not to hurt after falling out of my chair when he made me. I said, I have to say yes to this. Any question? So anyway, so the title is the Deming Management Method, and the subtitle you'll see is, I call it Thinking Beyond Bridges. And then I also want to reference the title of this year's event, Beyond Looking Good. And I don't know who I was talking to about that. And it was back in October, shortly after joining Ravi and I were talking about this event. And I said, I got this working title, Beyond Looking Good. Because I thought that's what most organizations are doing, is focusing on good, not better, good. And I want to have that, that will be pronounced in the presentation. How looking for good just stalls organizations. All right, so then there's some contact information. So as Kevin said, Dr. Deming died in 1993. So before his death, he gave us a map of theory by which to understand the organizations that we work in. And when I became fascinated about that theory, when I read the New Economics in 1993, I had worked at Rocketdyne for about 4 years in a full-time continuous improvement role. But most of what I was doing is helping people put out fires. So it wasn't taking things from good to better. It was like putting out fires. Fires on the Space Shuttle Management. I mean, not literally fires, but problems throughout the organization. We solved one, on to the next, on to the next. The first one I worked on had been going on for 6 months. We had it solved within 2 months. And the main reason it took 2 months is that the experiments we ran took a long time. And then no sooner we were done than that, there was a 1.5-year old problem in the Space Shuttle Unmanned Engine that went on for another 1.5 years. And midway through, it was after that was resolved in '93, I read the New Economics. And what fascinated me in there is that what he was describing is where I worked and pretty much where we all work. And that's what became fascinating to me. And so we refer to present state organizations as usual. And the contrast in a very simple model is there's usual and then unusual. It's a very simple model. And so Dr. Deming said, sure, we have fires, but when you stamp out the fires, what you do is return to where you were before the fire. So what you're then doing is allocating resources, looking in the past as to what went wrong. That's not future focused, that's rear focused. And then when you're done with that, you end up right back to where you started. And I thought, how do you stay in business going to the past, coming back to the present, other than your competitors doing the same thing? Okay. So in practicing organizations as usual, resources are allocated to firefighting with little perceived value for preventing problems from happening. And I want to clarify that. And so not only is there little perceived value in working on things unless there's a crisis, what doesn't go on is you don't see people in the organization wondering, where can I put a stitch in time to save 9? And several years ago, I was doing a class for a leadership studies program at USC, and in the room were 2 legislators, one current and one former. And when I mentioned that Dr. Deming's ideas could minimize the number of problems, he was fascinated by that. I said, minimizing problems is the starting point. I said, what's more exciting than that is then starting to think about where can I spend $1 to save 20, spend 100 to save 1,000, and those opportunities do not go on. But so what I want to look at is why we have problems in the first place and what prevents us from the bigger opportunities. So Dr. Deming's theory of management offers opportunities to both prevent problems and also seek opportunities for investment. So before going to Rocketdyne, I worked in the tank engine or gas turbine industry. We made tank engines and then rocket engines for the next 26 years. And then beginning of 2000, I started going to the UK. I had a friend over there, and we formed a deal where he would find places for me to present, such as Philips Light Bulb Factory near Glasgow, City Council of York, England. This is a library at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Then this is an after-school program, where all the kids in that program are now 23, 24 years old. There's somebody told me, you can't show their photos. Okay, fine. But what all these organizations have in common, if you forget about the kids, is people trying to apply Dr. Deming's ideas. And I would ask people, when I would do presentations in Los Angeles, I would say, how many of you work for companies that make rocket engines? And there wouldn't be anyone in the room. I'd say, I hate to bore you, but the ideas I'm sharing with you only apply if you work for companies that make rocket engines. It was just intended to be a joke. All right? But yet, I can't tell you how often I'm on the phone with people, and Kevin and I go meet with people, and they say, but do Dr. Deming's ideas apply if we don't do manufacturing, if we don't make cars, if we're not in high volume production? Yeah, they do. And at work, I remember being there was like a share fair going on at work, and I had a booth talking about what I was doing. And one guy came by and he said, so is what you're doing applicable to me? I said, it's applicable to all organizations. He said, even if I'm a one-person operation. I said, if you're Tom Hanks living on that desert island, right, in the movie Castaway, I said, your ability to survive is based on your ability to organize the resources on the island for shelter, for food. So yeah, they apply everywhere. So what the ideas are applicable to is improving how we connect resources together. And the together is a really big piece because organizations, as usual, fundamentally don't believe in together. The word may as well be replaced by separate, and that's what I want to show you. So the ideas are universally applicable, but we're still being asked this question, do they apply outside of manufacturing? And that's where this bridges picture comes in. And so these bridges were taken in New Hampshire across the same river, short proximity. So on the upper left is a railroad bridge, and then an automotive bridge, and then a footbridge. And what I like in the bridges, too, as I started taking pictures of bridges, is a bridge is an example to get you from where you are to where you could be. So you could say, well, give me an example how Dr. Deming's ideas might apply. Manufacturing, I'll give you an example. When I find that people get stuck on the bridge, they take the example and not realize what you really need to know is how to build the bridge. And the realization, when I spoke in England a number of years ago, I took photos of bridges across the UK. Every bridge was different because the materials required to build the bridge were different, and the spans were different. But yet, when you go off and look at some management theories that are out there in the literature, what they're sharing with you, people are focusing on, you're trying to take that bridge to your company, and that bridge won't fit in your company. I remember one example, I would play tennis on Wednesday nights with a neighbor. We'd go out at 10 o'clock at night and then play for a couple hours. And one time I was standing at the net, and the ball's on the other side of the net, and Jeff was at the baseline, so he had to hit the ball into the net. And so what I asked Jeff was, I said, whose job is it to retrieve the ball? Is it his job when he's at the baseline? He's got to walk all the way to the net. Because I could just put my racket down and kick the ball to him. And to me, in a Deming mindset, me putting the racket down and kicking the ball to him is an efficient use of resources. So when I'd asked Jeff, I said, whose job is it to return the ball? His answer was, depends on who's winning. Right, but the idea is that if I can go to work and I tell people that example, they would be like, but how do I design a rocket engine with that thinking? Right, because they're stuck on the tennis ball, not realizing it's about how we share resources. All right, so this is when I met Dr. Deming in 1990. Okay, and so at that point in time, he would ask questions like, are you in favor of quality, yes or no? Instead of talking about quality, what I found when people talk about quality, they say, oh, you want to talk to the vice president of quality, which moves the conversation to one department. Everybody else says, thank God I don't have to take that training. And so I frame it as, are you in favor of teamwork? And who does that apply to? Applies to everybody, right? But you say, what if you're Tom Hanks and you're on the island there? Well, then I'd say it's your ability to work with the resources on the island, which is still kind of a team activity. All right, so I broke the presentation down into these segments. So first, what does it mean to work together, learn together, think together? And I bought a digital camera years ago, went out and spent an afternoon taking photos of what I thought represented teamwork. And so this photo of the birds was taken over Magic Mountain Amusement Park. And what struck me, with my background in aerodynamics, is that these birds are not flying in a random pattern. They're spacing between the birds, right, just like spacing between professional bicyclists. So the gaps are what matters, and they're constantly maintaining the gaps. So they're flying together. Right? And so if you understand the concept of what it means to work together, then what does it mean to learn together? What does it mean to think together? So together, taken or considered collectively, conjointly, without interruption, continuously, uninterruptedly. All right, what do we do together? We eat together, drive together, sit together. So this term shows up all the time. All right, synonyms, jointly, mutually, collectively. All right, but take into account the contrast, separate, apart, individual, alone, independently. Think about Kevin, right? So Kevin's talking about the organization where he alone made it happen. So Kevin was operating down here, which is not uncommon. All right, so I went searching for Aesop's fable on the four oxen and the lion. And so the lion prowled around a field in which the four oxen used to dwell. And the photo I found on the search, something like this. So they're back to back to back. And then the oxen broke ranks and the lion ate them, leading to the expression, long before Abraham Lincoln, united we stand, divided we fall. So I put this out because the idea of working together is not a new concept. It's a very old concept. Henry Ford, coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, working together is success. Right? Van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. So we have United Airlines, United Technologies, United States, right? Manchester United. Not Manchester divided, right? All right, so resource management. So a picture is worth 1,000 words. So what do you see in the photo? People typically say a team. So I was coach of the team, and this photo was taken deliberately the day before the first game of the season, because I don't know until they get out there and share the ball or hoard the ball if it's a team or not. Because for all I know, Tanner in the front row is being paid by his grandfather $5 for every goal which is scored, which I saw happening. Not with Tanner, but I don't know in this photo who's willing to share and who's willing to hoard. But I've seen the behaviors. And I don't remember all their names, but this kid here was probably the most talented one in the field, and he really didn't think he needed anyone else. And so he would take the ball from center and get 10 feet and lose the ball and be frustrated every single time because he didn't realize he had teammates. All right, so the model I was working on within Rocketdyne with colleagues was, if we can increase the awareness of each of us and the ability to think together, so if you and I develop the ability to think together, meaning we're starting to focus on relationships as opposed to seeing things as separate, then I could, in working with you, begin to improve how we work together, just two people. That then can improve how we learn together, just two of us. Because again, Kevin's talking about, what is your ability to make an impact in your organization? And our model is, you alone can make an impact if you reach out to one person and begin there, right? So we can improve how we think together, work together, learn together. That then could begin to evolve the way we run the organization, and then have a reinforcing effect drawing others in. One colleague earlier on said, he said, Bill, we got to get everyone on board. I said, well, as soon as you set your sights on everyone on board, you create a disappointment because not everyone cares. And so what we ought to do every day is try to get one more person on board, one more person on board. But if you set your sights as we have to get everybody on board, it's just not going to happen. Just not going to happen. Because some people, they're interested, but they could have a personal crisis at home. So expecting everyone to get excited by what I'm sharing with you is not realistic. A two-headed rattlesnake. So some of you have heard this story. So in the early 90s, we moved to LA. We took our daughter to the LA Zoo. And in the reptile house, there was a two-headed rattlesnake. And there was a sign in the aquarium, on the aquarium, handwritten sign that said, in the wild, two-headed rattlesnakes have a very short life expectancy. What struck me as odd, because you know that expression, two heads are better than one? Only if they work together. Right? So this is an example. They're obviously not working together. If they were working together, two-headed rattlesnakes would have that'd be an advantage. So it's clearly not an advantage. Tom Johnson at Portland State. Okay, the world we perceive is the world we bring forth through our thinking, right? And what he's talking about is not that we see the world as it is, but we see the world as we are. So if you go around seeing things, and I'll give you some examples of this, you either see the world as connected or you see the world as separate. And it's more than talking about we like teamwork. That just doesn't get it done. When Boeing owned Rocketdyne for about 8 or 9 years, working together was the slogan for the 777 program. And I came up with presentations and I called it Present State Organizations We Talk About Working Together. That's what it is. It's a lot of talk about working together as opposed to really working together. Okay. And so I've been asking this question there's two different questions, but this is one variant of it. And so when I go to university settings, and many of you have heard this before, the question is, how much time do you spend studying for the final exam, using weekly quizzes and midterms, and looking at the questions you got right? How much time is spent studying the questions that were right when studying for the final exam? What I find is very little. Right. In industry, the question is, how much time is spent every day discussing parts, tasks, milestones, activities, which are good and going well? When I find the answer to that question is nearly almost zero all the time. And the only exception to when it's not zero is an organization that's doing research and development. But show me a product in production, 787, 747, engines at Rocketdyne. Show me products in production, and the answer to the second question is zero. I mean, almost to the point that I've been in audiences when I ask that question, and I have it go up on a slide, one particular aerospace company, there were 110 people in the room. Before I could turn to read the question, the room erupted in laughter. Because this whole notion of, why would you work on things that are good? And this is where the title of today comes from, Beyond Looking Good. Because what I find is, organizations that answer these questions zero are focused on what I know and being smart, not being smarter. They're focusing on being good, not better. So where does that come from? So a young woman I was mentoring years ago went to work in Chicago. A year later, she was named manager of the plant. She called me up like a week before. She wanted to know if I knew the news, and I said I hadn't heard. She says, what do you think I should focus on first as being plant manager? So I said, what do you think you should focus on first? And she said, I think I should focus on all the things that are broken. I said, you're being 100% reactive. I said, that requires no thought at all. You're waiting for the crisis to happen. And this is what I find on the news, on the cover of Time magazine, it's the latest crisis. So I want to talk about is, where does this thinking come from? Okay. Beyond looking good is not stopping here. So a model I started to come up with a number of years ago is, on average, are organizations allocating resources to activities that are proactive or reactive? And I find it's highly reactive. Again, if it's developing a new software system and it's not yet in production, developing it, then good does not exist because we haven't produced the product yet. But as the rocket engine, the software is being tweaked, and then the button is pressed and it goes into production, then I find organizations tend to be highly reactive. So proactive is applying effort while things are good, okay, or well. Okay. Reactive is applying effort after bad happens. Right. The other dimension of this model, which came about maybe a year or so later, I started focusing on the language of who owns the resources in an organization. And I started really, there were people talking about my conference room, my department, my ideas, my equipment. There wasn't a great sense of ours. And so what I found is in a non-Deming organization as usual, people tend to operate in the lower left quadrant. And so in terms of what type of resource management, the descriptor reflexive comes from Dr. Deming saying somewhere, pulling your hand off of a hot stove requires no thought. And I thought, that's the model. Because when I find with people, I say, well, are you working on things that are good? It's like, Bill, why would I work on things that are good? Now, on the other hand, right, and notice here, I didn't ask you where an organization that is unusual would operate, but if I had, I'm willing to bet you would have said the upper right quadrant. Yeah, organizations as usual operate on the right-hand side, right? But instead of being always proactive, the model is to be proactive where it makes sense and reactive where it makes sense. Which means being reactive on the right-hand side is a choice. Being reactive on the left-hand side is not a choice. It's the only option we have. So on the right-hand side, being reactive is, are you going to wait to go to the doctor when you're sick, or are you going to sign up and go for wellness visits? It's a choice. Right? You're going to put gas in the car before it runs out, or are you going to wait till it runs out? You're going to replace the light bulb before it burns out, or are you going to wait? You're going to call the plumber and come by with a fiber optic scope and go around and look before, or are you going to wait until you have a plumbing problem? And we think, oh, why would we be proactive? I mean, medical science has advanced due to fiber optic scopes that allow us, allow doctors to go in and do GI tests and can see colon cancer coming. Whereas when I went to elementary school, the cancer tests were to tell you you had cancer. There wasn't proactive. It was reactive. So on the right-hand side, we are purposely understanding I could be proactive, I could be reactive. That's a Deming organization. All right. So how important is customer satisfaction? Okay, I'm not going to ask Amy because she's already seen this. But for those who haven't seen this, what would you say? Paramount. First of all, realize, if I believed it was paramount, would we be discussing it? So it's not paramount. It's not unimportant, but it's not as important as we think it is. All right. So Boeing was really big. Boeing's vision was 2016, so back in the mid-90s when everybody else was focusing on the 2000, Ford 2000, GM 2000, Boeing's vision was 2016, which was the 100th anniversary of Boeing. So it's kind of cool to be a little bit different. But notice that customer satisfaction shows up as paramount, right up there with people working together. All right, so this is Christmas morning, 1998. My wife was driving that morning a fairly new Toyota Sienna minivan. What causes us to be disappointed by what happened that morning? What causes us to be disappointed by a product or service?
It broke down. It broke down.
Breaking down is not enough. It did not meet expectations. I mean, right? So if you spend $100 for an LED light, and it says will last 1,000 hours, and it burns out the next day, you're disappointed. If it burns out 2,000 hours later, you're thinking not a bad deal. All right, so here's what happened here. We bought the car that summer, driving to Bakersfield that morning, 10,000 miles on the transmission, and Monica wakes me up and says, there's essentially the car was like in neutral. So why are we disappointed? Because 10,000 is not my expectation on the transmission. Okay, what might be my transmission, or what might be our expectation for the life of the transmission? Okay, for the record, the replacement transmission didn't see 90,000 miles, which means the resale value of the car was what? Not very much. All right, so disappointment is failure to meet expectations. What do we call it when our expectations are met? That's satisfaction. What do we call when they're exceeded? That's delight. So the value proposition is delight is I put $1 into a change machine, get 5 quarters, it's legal, so I can sleep, right? So how's that feel? Right? Satisfaction, I put $1 and I get 4 quarters, how's that feel? Right? Disappointment, I put $1 and I get 3 quarters and I kick the machine, how's that feel? So disappointment is, right, our frustration with disappointment is we feel cheated. With delight, we feel like we got something for free and we're kind of guilty over, and somebody says, oh no, you can actually get this. All right, so how many people do we tell when we're delighted by a product or a service? Right? How many people do we tell when we're disappointed by a product or service? Okay, you ready? Who do you tell when you're satisfied? Who?
Nobody.
For the camera, who?
Nobody.
That's why it's highly overrated. And try this out this summer when you're having a family reunion. Send a note out to your cousins and whatnot and say, make sure to bring your satisfaction stories. Before we leave, we're going to go around the campfire and share them. So why is satisfaction so important? Right? Because everyone says satisfaction is incredibly important. Why are we led to believe that?
Because if people are disappointed, you hear about it.
What's that?
Because if people are disappointed, you hear about it.
I think we're so used to being disappointed, we'd be thrilled to get 4 quarters. We're going into the engagement thinking, if I break even, I'm thrilled, but I'm based on past experience, So the idea is that a Deming-based organization understands this model. A non-Deming organization stops at satisfaction. I'd be like, why should we go above and beyond? They didn't ask for it. All right, so a better way to operate an organization is to invest resources with the ability to manage. Manage means it's a choice. So if we had a restaurant, what aspect of the restaurant would be satisfactory, some would be disappointing, and others will be delightful. But it's not everything satisfactory. The model is better investment results from opportunities, discovering opportunities to invest. The discovery opportunities to invest is limited by how we're conditioned to think. So if we had a restaurant, a Deming-based restaurant, instead of everything being satisfactory, there'd be a few things that are above and beyond, not everything, because we don't have to be above and beyond on everything. So the wine list could be above and beyond, the salad bar could be above and beyond, but the tablecloths would be plain. But the big thing is it's deliberate. So we need a thing that promotes better discovery. All right, taking tests. All right, so I started using this question with college students, which I spent a lot of time with, trying to relate Deming's ideas to them. And so I was working with a woman, and I asked her the question, asked her if she'd ever heard it before. She'd heard it many times. So I said, OK, well, do this. And I said, create a rectangle. That's the process. The arrows going in are the inputs, and the output is your grade. So I said, what are the inputs? And she said, my ability, my commitment, and my energy. So I asked her what else, and 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, nothing. So I said, ever had a situation where other students ask questions, you learn from it, it affects the grade? She said, it happens all the time. I said, well, that means other students are inputs. Then I said, if other students are inputs, what other inputs can you see? And this was in a phone call. She says, my professor. I said, OK, write it down. My parents. I said, OK, write it down. She says, my brother. I said, OK, write it down. I then said, how many inputs are there? She then said, there's an infinite number. I said, well, if there's an infinite number, why'd you get stuck at 3? Because she was focusing on herself. Right? This is Kevin thinking, look at what I've done. So the idea is, as soon as you realize there are other inputs, the question shifts to, how do we do on the exam? When I shared this question with the college students and asked them, is there anything odd about that question? And I even talk about me and we organizations. And even prior to getting into it, I asked them, is there anything wrong with that question? The last word they question is the you. Because we're so used to thinking we caused the grade. Right? Kevin's thinking he alone changed the performance of his organization. Right? We go through school, elementary through college, thinking that we caused the grade by ourselves. I tell you, what an awakening it was to think of, in spite of all that time I spent answering every calculus problem, every conduction heat transfer problem, to realize that I actually had help. That's a lot of humility, as you heard from Kevin. Right? So in a we organization, we're talking about how are we doing on the design, how did we do on the proposal, how are we doing on the contract. Okay, this is leading up to the vision therapy. In Myron Tribus, similar thought to Tom Johnson, what we see depends upon what we thought before we looked. So with that trip report, I'm going to give you some instructions and then give you a few minutes to fill it out. What I want you to imagine is that you've recently visited 2 types of organizations, as if we could break it down to 2 solid organizations. One is a me organization, one is a we organization. And the contrast is what we've been talking about. Organizations as usual are me organizations. Organizations as unusual are we organizations. So imagine you recently visited, each of you went off to different me and we organizations for 2 weeks each. For the first week you visited both organizations, there were no people there. So what goes on in the trip report is, what do these organizations look like? If you were to go visit them, what would you see? And then for the second week, there are people there. So for the second week, focus on the people in both organizations in production, and the answer to the second question is 0. I mean, almost to the point that I've been in audiences when I ask that question, and I have it go up on a slide, one particular aerospace company, there were 110 people in the room. Before I could turn to read the question, the room erupted in laughter. Because this whole notion of, why would you work on things that are good? And this is where the title of today comes from, Beyond Looking Good. Because what I find is, organizations that answer these questions 0 are focused on what I know and being smart, not being smarter. They're focusing on being good, not better. So where's that come from? So a young woman I was mentoring years ago went to work in Chicago. A year later, she was named manager of the plant. She called me up like a week before. She wanted to know if I knew the news, and I said I hadn't heard. She says, what do you think I should focus on first as being plant manager? So I said, what do you think you should focus on first? And she said, I think I should focus on all the things that are broken. I said, you're being 100% reactive. I said, that requires no thought at all. You're waiting for the crisis to happen. And this is what I find on the news, on the cover of Time magazine, it's the latest crisis. So I want to talk about is where does this thinking come from? Okay, beyond looking good is not stopping here. So a model I started to come up with a number of years ago is, on average, are organizations allocating resources to activities that are proactive or reactive? And I find it's highly reactive. Again, if it's developing a new software system and it's not yet in production, developing it, then good does not exist because we haven't produced the product yet. But as the rocket engine, the software is being tweaked, and then the button is pressed and it goes into production, then I find organizations tend to be highly reactive. So proactive is applying effort while things are good, okay, or well. Okay. Reactive is applying effort after bad happens. Right. The other dimension of this model, which came about maybe a year or so later, started focusing on the language of who owns the resources in an organization. And I started really, there are people talking about my conference room, my department, my ideas, my equipment. There wasn't a great sense of ours. And so what I found is in a non-Deming organization as usual, people tend to operate in the lower left quadrant. And so in terms of what type of resource management, the descriptor reflexive comes from Dr. Deming saying somewhere, pulling your hand off of a hot stove requires no thought. And I thought, that's the model. Because when I find with people, I say, well, are you working on things that are good? It's like, Bill, why would I work on things that are good? Now, on the other hand, right, and notice here, I didn't ask you where an organization as unusual would operate, but if I had, I'm willing to bet you would have said the upper right quadrant. Yet organizations as usual operate on the right-hand side, right? But instead of being always proactive, the model is to be proactive where it makes sense and reactive where it makes sense. Which means being reactive on the right-hand side is a choice. Being reactive on the left-hand side is not a choice. It's the only option we have. So on the right-hand side, being reactive is, are you going to wait to go to the doctor when you're sick, or are you going to sign up and go for wellness visits? It's a choice. Right? You're going to put gas in the car before it runs out, or are you going to wait till it runs out? You're going to replace the light bulb before it burns out, or are you going to wait? You're going to call the plumber and come by with a fiber optic scope and go around and look before, or are you going to wait until you have a plumbing problem? And we think, oh, why would we be proactive? In medical science has advanced due to fiber optic scopes that allow us, allow doctors to go in and do GI tests and you can see colon cancer coming. Whereas when I went to elementary school, the cancer tests were to tell you you had cancer. There wasn't proactive. It was reactive. So on the right-hand side, we are purposely understanding I could be proactive, I could be reactive. That's a Deming organization. All right. So how important is customer satisfaction? Okay, I'm not going to ask Amy because she's already seen this. But for those who haven't seen this, what would you say? Paramount. First of all, realize, if I believed it was paramount, would we be discussing it? So it's not paramount. It's not unimportant, but it's not as important as we think it is. All right. So Boeing was really big. Boeing's vision was 2016. So back in the mid-90s when everybody else was focusing on the 2000, Ford 2000, GM 2000, Boeing's vision was 2016, which was the 100th anniversary of Boeing. So it's kind of cool to be a little bit different. But notice that customer satisfaction shows up as paramount, right up there with people working together. All right, so this is Christmas morning, 1998. My wife was driving that morning a fairly new Toyota Sienna minivan. What caused us to be disappointed by what happened that morning? What causes us to be disappointed by a product or service?
It broke down. It broke down.
Breaking down is not enough. It did not meet expectations. I mean, right, so if you spend $100 for an LED light, and it says will last 1,000 hours and it burns out the next day, you're disappointed. If it burns out 2,000 hours later, you're thinking not a bad deal. All right, so here's what happened here. We bought the car that summer, driving to Bakersfield that morning, 10,000 miles on the transmission, and Monica wakes me up and says, essentially the car was like in neutral. So why are we disappointed? Because 10,000 is not my expectation of the transmission. Okay, what might be my transmission, or what might be our expectation for the life of the transmission? Okay, for the record, the replacement transmission didn't see 90,000 miles, which means the resale value of the car was what? Not very much. All right, so disappointment is failure to meet expectations. What do we call it when our expectations are met? That's satisfaction. What do we call when they're exceeded? That's delight. So the value proposition is delight is I put $1 into a change machine, get 5 quarters, it's legal, so I can sleep, right? So how's that feel? Right? Satisfaction, I put $1 and I get 4 quarters, how's that feel? Right? Disappointment, I put $1 and I get 3 quarters and I kick the machine, how's that feel? So disappointment is, right, our frustration with disappointment is we feel cheated. With delight, we feel like we got something for free and we're kind of guilty over, and somebody says, oh no, you can actually get this. All right, so how many people do we tell when we're delighted by a product or a service? Right? How many people do we tell when we're disappointed by a product or service? Okay, you ready? Who do you tell when you're satisfied? Who?
Nobody.
For the camera, who?
Nobody.
That's why it's highly overrated. And try this out this summer when you're having a family reunion. Send a note out to your cousins and whatnot and say, make sure to bring your satisfaction stories. Before we leave, we're going to go around the campfire and share them. So why is satisfaction so important? Right? Because everyone says satisfaction is incredibly important. Why are we led to believe that?
Because if people are disappointed, you hear about it.
What's that?
Because if people are disappointed, you hear about it.
I think we're so used to being disappointed, we'd be thrilled to get 4 quarters. We're going into the engagement thinking, if I break even, I'm thrilled, but I'm based on past experience, So the idea is that a Deming-based organization understands this model. A non-Deming organization stops at satisfaction. They'd be like, why should we go above and beyond? They didn't ask for it. All right, so a better way to operate an organization is to invest resources with the ability to manage. Manage means it's a choice. So if we had a restaurant, what aspect of the restaurant would be satisfactory? Some would be disappointing, and others will be delightful. But it's not everything satisfactory. The model is better investment results from opportunities, discovering opportunities to invest. The discovery opportunities to invest is limited by how we're conditioned to think. So if we had a restaurant, a Deming-based restaurant, instead of everything being satisfactory, there'd be a few things that are above and beyond, not everything, because we don't have to be above and beyond on everything. So the wine list could be above and beyond, the salad bar could be above and beyond, but the tablecloths will be plain. But the big thing is it's deliberate. So we need a thing that promotes better discovery. All right, taking tests. All right, so I started using this question with college students, which I spent a lot of time with, trying to relate Deming's ideas to them. And so I was working with a woman, And I asked her the question, asked her if she'd ever heard it before. She'd heard it many times. So I said, okay, right, I'll do this. And I said, create a rectangle. That's the process. The arrows going in are the inputs, and the output is your grade. So I said, what are the inputs? And she said, my ability, my commitment, and my energy. So I asked her what else, and 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, nothing. So I said, ever had a situation where other students ask questions, you learn from it, it affects the grade? She said, it happens all the time. I said, well, that means other students are inputs. Then I said, if other students are inputs, what other inputs can you see? And this was, in a phone call. She says, my professor. I said, okay, write it down. My parents. I said, okay, write it down. She says, my brother. I said, okay, write it down. I then said, how many inputs are there? She then said, there's an infinite number. I said, well, if there's an infinite number, why'd you get stuck at 3? Because she was focusing on herself. Right? This is Kevin thinking, look at what I've done. So the idea is, as soon as you realize there are other inputs, the question shifts to, how do we do on the exam? When I shared this question with the college students and asked them, is there anything odd about that question? And I even talk about me and we organizations. And even prior to getting into it, I asked them, is there anything wrong with that question? The last word they question is the you. Because we're so used to thinking we caused the grade, right? Kevin's thinking he alone changed the performance of his organization, right? We go through school, elementary through college, thinking that we caused the grade by ourselves. I tell you, what an awakening it was to think of, in spite of all that time I spent answering every calculus problem, every conduction heat transfer problem, to realize that I actually had help. That's a lot of humility, as you heard from Kevin. Right? So in a we organization, we're talking about how are we doing on the design, how did we do on the proposal, how are we doing on the contract. Okay, this is leading up to the vision therapy. In Myron Tribus, similar thought to Tom Johnson, what we see depends upon what we thought before we looked. So with that trip report, I'm going to give you some instructions and then give you a few minutes to fill it out. What I want you to imagine is that you've recently visited 2 types of organizations, as if we can break it down to 2 solid organizations. One is a me organization, one is a we organization. And the contrast is what we've been talking about. Organizations as usual are me organizations. Organizations as unusual are we organizations. So imagine you recently visited, each of you went off to different me and we organizations for 2 weeks each. For the first week you visited both organizations, there were no people there. So what goes on in the trip report is, what do these organizations look like if you were to go visit them? What would you see? And then for the second week, there are people there. So for the second week, focus on the people in both organizations and what are they like. So for the next 2 minutes, put at least one thing in each of those cells, just driven by that recurring thing what Kevin started off as, look what I did versus look what we did. So what does that mean in terms of how the organizations look? And what does that mean in terms of how the people in the organizations appear as you walk around? What's that?
I'll take an incomplete.
Okay. You need a pen? Okay. All right, one more minute. Again, the important thing is to get at least one thing in each of those cells. This is where you kick in the Jeopardy soundtrack. All right. So again, the important thing is have at least one thing in each cell. All right, so do this. For the next minute, compare answers with whoever's sitting next to you in 2s or 3s. Sue's got the right answer.
We at the top, I would say it's more open policy kind of clean, so everybody kind of works in the same area. Same thing right there, they're collaborating, they're smiling, same thing over it, there's space at the bottom, so it's quiet.
And then comparable.
Pretty easy to see the difference.
Sounds good. Well, that's what does a happy, smiling organization physically look like? That's a people characteristic. Good. Yes.
It's funny to see the difference. People work together as opposed to apart.
Is this your first time doing it? Okay, cool. All right. So let me get your attention. So the first question is, when you compared, did anything jump out that you said, I have no idea where that comes from? Is there anything the other person had and you just say, right, you're just... So in other words, then most of what the other person had, you would say, I can understand where that comes from? Okay. And that's what I found, having done this 500 times since the 97, 98 time frame, the responses are very, very similar. So, so in the beginning, I would write them on a flip chart and throw it away. Then they started to become interesting and more interesting, so I started to collect them and date them. So this is January 2001. So over here, yoga class schedule. Anybody have that? No walls. Somebody had that? No walls. Clean and well maintained, well lighted, good air. Not a lot of waste. Daycare on site. Anybody have that? Break rooms, visible metrics. Bathroom facilities. That's always a plus. All right, down here, highly motivated, on the floor management, open lines of communication, attentive, enjoy working, part of the solution. They're not part of the problem, self-inspection. They enjoy the people they work with and they smile. Okay, over here, slogans, empty slogans. Front office manager, someone always looking over their shoulder, dictatorial, unattentive, individualistic behavior, punitive, quota data gatherers, on a time clock. They go with the flow. Up here, not well maintained individual departments, walls, poor utilization of assets, separate and distinct work areas. You had that, right? Outdated facilities, sloppy, candle lighting. I remember a company I worked for, the jet engine company in Connecticut. We wanted to have in our department the carpets vacuumed. And the VP of engineering said, if you guys clean up your trash, we'll clean the carpet. So we were negotiating for services. Again, really. So any of you have anything maybe a little bit different than any of these you want to share? Yes?
And just in a me organization, you drive up and there's reserved parking for the manager.
Reserved parking.
In a we organization, everybody parks unless everybody else parks on
Yep.
the building.
So I worked for a company where, when the company was sold, prior to that, it was no signs. You park anywhere, right? New company came in, immediately the signs went up, reserved, 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 and then one sign was reserved at all times. And so one morning, I'm walking in with the president, who was a really cool guy, and every October he would allow his parking spot to be raffled off as a fundraiser for a nonprofit. And he would park way away. So that morning we were both walking in, and he looks up and he sees the signs. He says, reserved at all times. He says, what's the difference? He said, that's what we're wondering. He says, the running joke was, one is don't park here, and the other one is don't even think about it. But what you're seeing in that environment is telltale signs of separation. Right? And what else? Anything else jump out? Yes?
I think with the newer trend on the B side for physical, I call it like the fake open office, where it's just like cubicles, but they took out the walls, so now you have even less space. You see it a lot in like programming farms, just like computer, but it's an open office because they shoved the ping pong table in the corner.
Yeah, so what you have is a me organization without walls. There's still mental walls, but there's no physical walls. In fact, in that regard, as you're walking around with a clipboard, a me organization, right? So in the lower right quadrant, as you were each walking around that organization, what was it like to interact with people who work there?
The thing that I thought of that applies to the people is in a me organization, you see their individuality. In a me or in a we organization, you see a team.
Yeah.
And you kind of interact with the team rather than each person.
So as you walk down the hallway in a me organization with a clipboard as part of your trip report, and you come up across people that work there, what is that interaction like as they come up on you?
In a me organization,
In a me organization, how would they interact with you?
kind of defensive, uncertain.
They see you with a clipboard,
Very,
right? Would your presence cause rumors? She's writing things down. Right? I mean, might they even go far out of their way not to even interact with you? Whereas, think about the same person interacting with you in a we organization, you're walking down the hall with a clipboard. What is that interaction like?
They're coming up and shaking your hand, introducing themselves.
What are you doing? What are you collecting?
How can I help you?
So when I was working in Connecticut on a major problem that went on for several months, and it started during a strike, and so we were racing to get things done, and then the strike was over. The people running the machine were back, and we were working with them at their pace and all, and I remember being there one morning, like on a Sunday morning, and he says, so why are you here? And I said, well, I'm here, blah, blah, blah. And he says, you're getting paid overtime. And I said, no, I'm just here, working on this. He says, man, you're a fool. Well, 24 hours later, I was still there. And he's like, you're still here? And I said, well, if anything goes wrong, I need to be here to watch what's going on. Well, eventually he became interested in what I was doing. And I said to him, and he became fascinated. He comes over and he says, so what's this all about? And I told him. He became so interested. I tell you, when we're done, I'll show you the results. So I went to someone in management after a presentation of the results, and I said, I'm going to go to Building 10 and share the results. He said, you're not going to do that. I said, why not? He said, if you show them how to optimize the equipment, he said, they'll figure out how to destroy the equipment. You show them the best way to run it, they're going to do the opposite. So I said, so you trust them to run the equipment, but you don't trust them to show them how the machines operate? He says, you're not going to show them anything. That's not an uncommon set of behaviors in a me organization. So what percent of organizations do you think are me organizations versus we?
About 80-20.
What people have been telling me in this unscientific survey is the majority. What keeps them in business? What's that? You said?
The majority that they're competing with are the same.
Yeah, when I told my boss who went on to become a very senior Boeing executive, I said, what keeps us in business is what? It's a lousy competition. We blame our employees, they get dejected, problems happen, and the others are run the same way. So we don't have an advantage because we're run the same way. Right? So the contrast, the right-hand side, the left-hand side is beyond looking good. The right-hand side is all about focusing on good.
Do you find that similar in the public sector type of thing?
Oh, yeah.
Percentage, or is
Oh,
it
yeah.
worse?
Oh, yeah, it's
I
all
would
the same.
anticipate it would
The only difference in the public sector
There's
is
great
that
competition.
I did training in the city of Los Angeles, and I said the only difference is you guys aren't worried about being sold to the city of San Diego. They're all run the same way.
I was just thinking it might have been a little bit worse just because of the.
I've seen nonprofits, they're all run the same way. Yeah, but they're run, and the difference between them is not stupidity, it's ignorance. So I'm not saying these people are deliberately trying to screw up. In fact, one really profound observation from one of the most senior executives I've ever had go through any of this training, he looked at these characteristics and he said there's nothing wrong with those people. That's the system, that the system has created those people. He said those people could become these people, and I've seen that. And so for him to observe that it's not a people issue, it's a system issue, now the question is who's responsible for the system? We all are. Because we all play in that system. Every time you answer the question, how'd you do on the exam, how are you doing on sales, you're contributing to the perpetuation of the system. Now, I find they're all the same. I mean, the reason the Deming Institute has this special place for people in the public sector is the public sector deals with the consequences of the private sector throwing people out the door. So those externalities are our problem. So then companies hire and fire, hire and fire. They get thrown out into the street. Now it's up to us. Think of the Bruce Springsteen song. What's the song? We take care of our own. And to me, the public sector is about taking care of our own. And the more we had we organizations, the less pressure there would be on the public sector to go take care of all that. All right, adding up. So we live in Santa Clarita, which is this green circle here in LA. Downtown LA is somewhere down in here. But over here is New Kiama. And again, for those of you in Stephen Review's class, you saw this, but for the others, this is a real sign. At the time the sign went in, 562 people lived there, 2150. I don't know if that's changed, maybe with a few earthquakes. Established 1951. And this is, if you drive through, this is a real sign. If you drive through New Kiama and blink, you'll miss it. I mean, it is a maybe one stop sign. All right, so this sets the stage for addition. So what does 1 plus 1 equal? What we're used to is 1 plus 1 is 2, which means what? An apple and an apple is 2 apples, a cup of water is 2 cups of water. That's everyday addition. How about this? What if these 7 departments, which are linked as shown, each save $1,000? Do those savings add? And the answer is they do not add. But for those who haven't seen this exposure, what is the difference between this and this? Addition works here, but it doesn't work here. Any guess why? I mean, several years ago, Mayor Villaraigosa said, there's a major cost-cutting effort in the city of Los Angeles, and he talked about adding up the savings. I mean, business as usual adds up the savings. In a we organization that's unusual, there's a realization that savings only add if the activities are separate. So this savings could be someone going off and buying cheaper cleaning solution that this person needs to use the cart to clean the carpeting. So maybe now it doesn't clean the carpeting as well. Is that an issue? So think about how often do we have activities. The idea is that this activity feeds these activities. They are interdependent. So the savings of the cheaper cleaning solution is only a savings if we don't use it. You get a hospital that goes off and replaces the expensive doctors with cheap doctors. That's a savings if they never see anyone. But as soon as those cheaper doctors go into those examining rooms, you might begin to see that it's not as cheap as you thought it was. Okay? So savings do not add when you depend on my work and I depend on your work. When things depend, addition doesn't work. Addition is the absence of a relationship. And I explained this to our daughter when she was in 6th grade. I came home one night. I had given her an assignment to have the adults in an after-hours training look at what does 1 + 1 equal, which she thought was a dumb question. And I said, well, it's not so dumb. And I explained to her that if her and I worked at Taco Bell and each had a taco stand that can make 1 taco in an hour, I said, Allison, your taco stand's over there, my taco stand's over here. So in 1 hour, how many tacos can we make? She said 2. I said, how are we working? She said, separately. I said, what if we threw lettuce at each other? She said, oh, then it would be less than 2. What if we collaborated while you did the shells, I did the hamburger? No, it's more than 2. So working together is not addition. Working together is the potential that 1 + 1, 2 people can do the work of 4, 5, 6. So is that applicable in any organization? Right? And if people work against each other, that's like 10 people doing the work of 2. Can that apply anywhere? Yes. Right, the next question is, can you show me any organization where people are actually independent, where someone can go off and get cheap cleaning solution or save money and it won't impact the others? Can you think of an environment where that would never happen? So for the City Council of York, which is the lower left, the advice I gave them was, because one of them was involved in city housing, and at the end of the seminar, I said, what you ought to be doing is educating the Yorkshire Post, because when you decide that more expensive paint, which is more mildew resistant, therefore doesn't need, because they're responsible for painting homes owned by the city housing, I said, the more expensive paint will last longer, therefore that's doing more with less, but do you realize what the front page headline will read in the Yorkshire Post? Extravagant use of paint. And what they're missing is paint is not paint, but we take it as interchangeable. And I'll give you some more on that. So one, things don't add, and this is what I was alluding to earlier. Can you imagine an environment where somebody spends an extra $500 over here, and that investment could result in a $3,000 savings over there? Right? First ask, in a me organization, would I ever spend money in my department to help anyone in another department? And even if I did that discreetly, what if my boss found out about it? Right? Do you think he or she would smile at me? So these are the opportunities that exist anywhere. This is what I was trying to get across to the state legislator. How about these opportunities? That's just 2 people working together. Again, beyond looking good. In this Sufi tradition, you think because you understand 1, you understand 2, because 1 and 1 makes 2. But what's missing is we have to understand and, which is what is the nature of the relationship. So what Dr. Deming's talking about is there's no relationship addition works. If it's a positive relationship, then you have super addition, 2 people doing the work of 4, 5, 6. If you have negative addition, negative additivity, then you go the other way. All right, seeing systems. All right, so Kevin mentioned my background working at Rocketdyne. So there's a space shuttle. And all I'm showing here is, I work with engineers who are working on these things, and they could easily forget that this is part of this, is part of this, is part of this. And it gets more complicated than that. So Raskolnikov says a system is not the sum of its parts, right? That alone, right? Sum, right? That's addition. It's the product of the interactions. The art of managing interactions is very different than the management of actions, and history requires this transition. Right, how many of you on Saturday morning when you're running errands treat them as independent activities, meaning you randomly go to Walmart and then come home and randomly then reach in the job jar, pull out the next one that says go get the dry cleaning, right? Do you treat them as random, or do you figure them out, line them up? That's managing interactions. The point is that that's what we naturally do. So a product is conceived, could be a cordless screw gun, could be a rocket engine, could be a software system, could be the new operation of a hospital. It's conceived with uses in mind, but this is how it's managed. We break it into parts, and each person gets a part. Right? But on the left-hand side, there are no parts. But because these things don't grow on trees, right? So in nature, there are no parts. So we create the parts in order to create this whole. So the actions are the parts taken separately. The interactions that Akoff's talking about is how well they work together, right? Defines how well the hospital operates, how well the school system operates, how well the national park operates. And it depends on literally the gaps between them. Meaning if they all fly in close formation but never touch, think of those birds. The proposal is those birds flying in space are managing the spacing between them. And if you manage the spacing, you can improve the performance of the product, if you manage the spacing. The trouble is organizations, as usual, manage the parts, not the spacing. So in the late 1960s, Frank Pipp, an assembly plant manager for Ford, instructed his team to take apart competitors' cars. His plan was to have his final assembly team take the competitors' cars apart and learn how they assemble, because how things come together tells you a whole lot about organizations. As long as they're separate, you don't learn a lot. How well the organization works, how well the product works, depends on how well they come together. At that time, connecting parts within Ford could rarely be assembled without a rubber mallet used to bang them together. If two parts went together without a mallet, the Ford plant called them snap fit. Right? And Pipp's experience with snap fit was rare. To his amazement, one competitor's car, a Toyota pickup truck, was purchased in 1969 and assembled without mallets. The plant manager was so astounded by the results, he had the assembly team take it apart again. The second time, he realized there was something serious going on, so he called out someone from Ford's corporate headquarters. And when that executive came out, he told the team the customer would never notice the difference. But think about it, that is the response of a business as usual environment. And the plant manager, Frank Pipp, quit Ford, went to work for Xerox, because he saw the Toyota product, and I don't know that he knew Dr. Deming's affiliation with it, but he knew that that was a different system than they were doing. So this is an excerpt of a conversation between Dr. Deming and Russ Akoff, 1992. Russ taught at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, for 25 years. And Russ says, the characteristic way of management we have taught in the Western world is to take a complex system, divide it into parts, and try to manage each part as well as possible. And if that's done, the system, what? The sense is that's as good as it gets.
Yeah.
Right? To which Russ says that's absolutely false. What's missing is that the parts wouldn't fit. Think of the hammers at Ford. To which Dr. Deming says they would not work together. So the together term shows up again. To which Russ said, good. So it's the working together that's the main contribution to systemic thinking, as opposed to working in parts separately. And that's the contrast I've been trying to bring out. Most of what the world is doing is managing parts taken separately. What Dr. Deming's talking about, with a lot of help from Russ Akoff, who's a systems theorist, is that it's about the relationships between the parts, not the parts taken separately. To which Dr. Deming says in the video, yes, so easy it is to observe, to see, to understand, and yet people do not know about it. I mean, I've been doing presentations at the UCLA MBA programs, USC MBA programs, taught for 4 years at Kellogg, adjunct. And what Dr. Deming is saying is people do not know about it. Yet it's right in front of them. I mean, they're managing their task on Saturday morning as if they're interdependent. Then they're going to work and treating the same tasks as separate. So we go between a world of interdependent, and then we enter a space where we treat things as independent. And we're not confused because we're not paying attention to the difference. So beyond looking good is understanding what Akoff's talking about. All right, so to further in your education, what letter grade is required for all the parts purchased? And I asked this question of a very, very senior NASA executive. And I said, you know, in the products we were selling them, I said, what's the letter grade for everything that goes into these products? Not just Maseratis and Model Ts, but just about everything. What's the letter grade requirement? And not only the incoming stuff, is what's the letter grade requirement within the organization on every handoff, right? So not just coming into the organization, but when every person in the organization hands off to the next person, what's the letter grade requirement? And this guy said A+, and I said the requirement is not A+. The requirement is passing. You see the difference? Passing means meets requirements. That's good. All right? And so what we have in organizations as usual is a pass-fail system. The requirements are met or they're not met. And what we're doing is stopping at good. And so what does that mean? If the requirement is GPA 3.0 and the result is a little bit more than that, then that's considered good. That's considered bad. It's black and white. If the speed limit is 55 miles per hour, less than that is good. More than that could get you in trouble. Some requirements are one-sided, some are two-sided. So you could have a recipe that says stir between 45 and 50 minutes. And so one is too low, one's too high, and the other two are good. So in the world of requirements, requirements are met, requirements are established, and then we look to see is a requirement met or not. It's a black and white, good or bad system. And so but by comparison, let's take an apology. All right, so you ask your son to apologize to your daughter, and it could be a really weak sorry, or a little firmer sorry, or a very sincere sorry. What it's showing here is it's actually a continuum. All right, so let's look at 3 sets of requirements, everyday requirements. So you tell your teenage daughter be home between 10 and midnight, or your teenage son. What time do they show up? Okay. The term paper must be between 20 and 25 pages long. A few years ago, my son was writing a term paper. And he had me read it. It was like 7 pages. I said, this is really good. He said, I need 3 more pages. So I know where you're coming from. All right. I've got a professor I work with at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. He tells me in a philosophy design class, if he tells the students, come in for the next class with at least 20 ways to do this, they'll come in with 20. So this is a focus on good. All right, so we went bowling as a family a number of years ago, walked down the hallway, found my wife's bowling ball inside the doorway, and I asked her why it was there. She said, ask your son. So I called him over, and I said, why is it here? And he said, Mom said, put it in the bedroom. Did he meet requirements? Because appreciate it, in a we organization, meeting requirements is the objective, not how well. Nobody calls anybody on how well. So that's organizations as usual, managing actions. Michael Gottfried in Seattle had his son put his books away, put his clothes away, borderline. And then somebody sent me this photo. The point is, in the world of me organizations, requirements are distributed across the organization. Then we say, have you met them? Have you met them? Have you met them? And there's only 2 answers to that question, yes or no. That's the focus on good. So when we look at all these parts in a rocket engine, an airplane, cordless screw gun, what we're doing in terms of managing tasks is looking at every single one of them and saying, pass or fail. That's managing actions. If we were to go beyond looking good, we'd be paying attention to how they work together. And when you understand how they work together, you've shifted from a me organization to a we organization. And the results are night and day different. The system as a whole would behave well, and that's absolutely false. Right? That's the idea of managing actions. What Russ says, what's missing is that the parts wouldn't fit. Think about it. In a me organization, who is responsible for the spacing between the parts? In a me organization, who owns the gap? Nobody. How helpless is that? Nobody owns the gap. In a we organization, who owns the gap? We jointly own the gap. So on a soccer field, what we're talking about, on a football field, right, where they use the word soccer or football, in professional sports, the spacing matters. One player moves, the others move in unison. That's organizations as unusual. So now I get into modes of thinking and then wrap it up. What do you call the person who graduates last in his or her class in medical school? What do you call the person who graduates last in his or her class at West Point? The technical term is goat, as in the animal. Okay. I don't know where the term comes from, but it's been around for a long time. Turns out Pickett, as in Pickett's charge, graduated last in his class, and so did Custer. And the report I read that Custer took delight in graduating last in his class. He was deliberately lazy. All right, so these two modes of thinking I want to get into, and then we'll just to help you tie all this together. So I started focusing on is the proposal that we have two modes of thought. One is we put things in categories, and the other we put things on a continuum. So in category thinking is the idea, I say to you, what is this? And you say it's a remote, or it's an LCD projector. What we've then done is put that in a category. So you have to have at least two categories. So with category thinking, it goes on the left or the right, it's absolute. And on the right-hand side, with continuum thinking, everything is relative. So with continuum thinking, there are no categories. With category thinking, things are discrete. With continuum thinking, there's wholeness, and I'll give you a little bit more insight where that comes from. With category thinking, we have good and bad, smart and dumb, but on a continuum, we can do better than good. Because I've asked people, so we take the parts that are bad and make them good. What do we do with the ones that are good? And the looks on people's faces is like, what? Because there's nothing beyond good. Well, there's nothing beyond good because you're stuck over here. If you operate on the right-hand side, you can have smarter, faster, taller, right? But as long as we're operating on the left-hand side, we're stuck. And the proposal is we use both modes of thought all day long, but we're not paying attention. And then the other thing I just did was you can break categories into categories. So we have fruit and vegetables, then we have types of fruit, and then we have types of apples, but the proposal is in category thinking, everything that goes in this top left category is considered to be identical with everything else. So that could be all Christians are the same, all New Yorkers are the same, right? So category thinking puts things simply in categories, and this creates problems. I mean, it's a simple system. The problems are created when we assign judgment. All right, so what do you call the person who graduates last in her class at in medical school? The answer, doctor, is a category, as category thinking. But GOAT is continuum thinking because GOAT is saying West Point takes graduate number 1 through number 400, and when you rank them in order, that's continuum thinking. So which mode of thinking are we using when we seek a recommendation for a heart surgeon? Which mode is that? That's category thinking. I'm sorry, continue. Yeah, when we seek a recommendation, that's category thinking. I'm ahead of myself. All right, which mode of thinking is being used by a health insurance provider who suggests a less expensive heart surgeon? They're all the same, take the cheapest one. Which mode of thinking are we using when we count sheep, count customers, and the number of goals scored by Wayne Rooney against Liverpool? That's category thinking, right? Category thinking, we ignore differences. We don't say this goal is more challenging than that goal. A goal is a goal. A run is a run, right? In order to count, we have to treat them as interchangeable, so all parts are the same, all goals are the same. Right, and that's the last point. All items are considered to be perfectly interchangeable. That's category thinking. There's a place for that. And then we'll close with Dr. Deming's work in profound knowledge. And the idea is that the proposal is a better understanding of all this sets the stage for Dr. Deming's monumental work, his book, The New Economics. Because without that, we're talking with people who fundamentally don't understand the difference between me and we. So he's providing solutions to go from me to we, or how to start we and stay we. And the proposal is, if you don't have that mindset, then what he's saying just gets stuck in everything else we're focusing on. So again, so Kevin gave a quote earlier, and so here, the prevailing system of management must undergo transformation. The system cannot understand itself. The system requires an outside view. So within the Ford plant, they're banging things together again and again and again. Do you think one day a worker goes in and says to his coworkers, hey, I think this car could be assembled without mallets? I mean, now and then they did that, but you can imagine somebody in there saying, do you think the entire car could be done that way? And if someone did have that suggestion, then it might be time for your analysis. Right? The first step is transformation of the individual. The transformation is discontinuous. It comes from an understanding, he said, of the system of profound knowledge. The individual transformed perceives new meaning. Right? Think of Kevin. Perceive new meaning to events, to life, to numbers, to interactions between people. The outside view, what Deming's talking about, all related to each other, is do we have appreciation for a system? And that's the notion. These parts are not separate. They're actually connected. Do we have knowledge about variation and that all those doctors are actually different, all those employees are actually different? So we have to manage the variation. The psychology piece, somebody asked me once, I said, so the psychology stuff, that's only when you have people. Yeah, if you've got a factory filled with machines and no people, then you can work with the 4 elements, the 3 elements. You don't have to worry about psychology. That's when we get into machines running machines. The theory of knowledge piece, what Dr. Deming is talking about, is theories are predictions of the future. So what he's talking about in a me organization, well, in a we organization, we have theories about improving how we work together, improving how we learn together. And a theory is a prediction of the future with a chance of being wrong, which means we learn and then adapt. And so imagine the possibilities of a Deming management environment if organizations could develop a deeper appreciation of continuous and connected learning, if people in organizations could develop a deeper appreciation of working, learning, and thinking together in the markets that could be created, right, doing all this together. And then there's one last slide. All right, so we can, and what's behind this slide, there's another one, is realizing these are choices. Once you become aware, these are all choices. So should we be a me or we organization? Should we be proactive or reactive? Should we focus on mine or ours, be reflexive or purposeful? Should we choose Deming management or leave things as they are? And this is the other slide I was thinking of. I met General Dunwoody, who became the Army's first woman 4-star general. I met her on that date in 2008 and gave a presentation at her huge conference back east. She was in charge of all Army logistics. And as we're heading out for drinks, she said, you need to have a slide at the end of your presentation that says, can anyone refute this proposal? And I said, well, what do you mean on my proposal? She said, well, your proposal on teamwork. I said, who's against teamwork? She said, that's my point. All right, so with that, there's the last slide. And well, let's see. When we save the questions, we'll go ahead and grab lunch and save your questions for the panel at the end. All right, thank you.